Welcome to the Teaching Bites podcast. Here are your hosts, Fred and Sharon Jaravada.
Welcome to the Teaching Bites show, where we connect you with teachers and ideas so you can take your teaching to the next level. I'm your host, Fred Jaravada, and today I have a special guest with me, and he has extensive experience teaching the younger students and also coding. He is now a coder in residence in our school, and we're really happy to have him join us today. So we have Mr. Ryan Hui. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, how are you?
Good morning. How you doing?
Good.
All right. So, Ryan, welcome to the show, and I want to let our listeners know about your origin story. So if you can go ahead and tell us your origin and your background in education.
Sure. So I guess I'll just start. I was born in Canada, and I was raised in a place called Redding, California, which is in Northern California. And I got into teaching while attending San Francisco State University. So I went there and I started studying computer science for 2 years. And that was kind of always my niche growing up. I always loved technology and computers. And then at SF State, I kind of fell in love with teaching. I got this after-school job, and I worked there for 3 years. And I just had the best experiences building relationships with children and kind of just hanging out with them, seeing the social development, and just really enjoying what teaching was about.
Right. What age group, what grades were you primarily working with?
So at that time, I was working with specifically 4th and 5th graders. However, the after-school program encompassed curriculum with all of K through 5. Right. So I had chances to work with kindergarten through 5th grade.
Okay, cool. So now how did you get into coding and all this coding stuff that's going on that's very popular today?
Yeah, so like I said, I studied computer science as well. And I kind of always had a special place for computers in my heart. So I started going down that education route and started to get into teaching. And I felt that a lot of times a lot of the curriculum, the things we were asking students to do wasn't necessarily as useful as they might have been in the past. So
can you give us an example?
Yeah. So for example, I always think of this is kind of for older kids, but in high school, for example, there's a life skills class where I learned how to sew, and that is a great skill. I personally don't think it's a useful skill in terms of finding a job these days, and so
because things are getting automated now.
Exactly.
Right.
I think another good example is cursive. We're moving away from teaching cursive, but we really don't use cursive very much in our writing. In fact, we don't really write by hand that much at all. We type mostly. So there's just things I noticed in the classroom and how much technology was becoming part of our day-to-day curriculum with the smart TVs and projectors and whatnot. I remember when we had a projector, we had a little, like a transparent, and you put the transparent on and it shined
overhead
out.
Overhead, right?
Exactly, yeah. And now it's all digital. So I just saw more and more technology being part of our day-to-day life. And after I kind of went through about 5 years in education, I kind of had this epiphany where I was thinking, there's such a lack of computer science enrichment in all of our curriculum across the board. Why is that? And so I tried to start Code Ninjas to kind of fill that gap.
Okay. So talk about Code Ninjas and where we can find more about Code Ninjas.
Yeah, so Code Ninjas is...
with a Z, right?
Yeah, it's Code Ninjas with a Z. So this is a program I started. It's basically a computer science enrichment. So our main focus is after school, because I've found that it's really hard to get curriculum implemented in the day-to-day school. You have to have all of the teachers on board, all of the principals, all of the staff, just everybody who's involved to be on board, and that can be a little bit difficult.
Now, let me stop you right there. Now, why do you think it's difficult? And I think I know why, but I want to hear what your experience is on that.
Well, as a teacher and as having lots of friends who are teachers, we always feel overwhelmed. There's always not enough time to prep, not enough time to teach your lesson, not enough time to build good relationships with the kids. And so I think when teachers hear coding, they get stressed out. They're saying, oh no, I have so much on my plate already. How am I going to fit something else on that I know absolutely nothing about?
Right.
And there has been in recent in the recent 5 years or so, more pressure to have more coding curriculum. So we've seen kind of a pushback from some teachers and also an embracing of other teachers.
Right.
So it's been interesting.
It's very interesting now. I know, what do you think of code.org and the whole movement of them pushing into the classrooms?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I personally think that any curriculum at this point is good curriculum. I understood what they were trying to do. They're trying to like ease in teachers in a very subtle way, that showing them that's not hard to do, that anybody can do an hour of code. And that is 100% true. It is great. I think it's an excellent stepping stone. But I think the end goal should be the districts, stepping up and designing an actual computer science curriculum and implementing it into all public schools. But, knowing the public schools and logistics, it takes a long time, and it's hard to do.
So where does Code Ninjas, your organization, where does it come in to play?
Right. So we kind of wanted to be that bridge between the after school and the day school. So after school we found is a little bit easier to set up because normally it's supported by the parents, it's financed by the parents, and it's less on the teachers and the school. So by doing after school, it kind of got our foot in the door to kind of explain to different schools and principals and directors of technology that coding is really important and it should be part of our daytime curriculum.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So being a classroom teacher, if you can help out a classroom teacher, and I know a lot of our listeners are from kindergarten to up to high school grades. What's a good way? What's an easy way besides code.org? What's another good way or good ways for integrating coding, but also giving the teacher some kind of confidence for them so they can, learn coding, but, that doesn't eat too much of their time?
Right.
Any ideas on that?
Yeah, so I just want to first say that the term coding, I think, is just such a general term, but somehow it's kind of pinpointed to this thing that people think they know what it is, where, they want coding and stuff, but they don't really understand how broad of a term that is. So you can, in the spectrum of coding, you can start anywhere. I think a great place to start, especially for younger teachers, is to just understand that all coding is a simple language, just like French or Spanish or Chinese. It's just a language we use to kind of express ourselves and design programs to make our lives easier. Coding is so many different languages, and so when you get fluent in a language, you're able to create beautiful things, like
right.
Like the big CEOs who, like Facebook, of course, and
right.
Snapchat.
Yeah, so coding, can you break it down? What is coding really simply? What does it mean, coding? And I know you alluded already to it, but for the brand newbie, coding, what is it? We know it's a language, or it's been talked about as a language, but what does it do? Why does it look like that?
Yeah, and I mean, it depends on the language, but in a basic form, it just tells the computer what to do. So if I were to say I'm using HTML, which is what we teach at Code Ninjas to our kids, they basically open up a basic program, a text editor, and by putting in the different types of code, the computer understands that language. So you're basically communicating to the computer. So it's a language to communicate between humans and computers. And so when I type in different things into this text edit, I'm telling the computer to make my website look like this, or add this picture, or move this here or there, or make this pop up.
Okay.
And that's all it really is all it is. Coding is a language to tell the computers what to do. Okay.
Now, you mentioned HTML, and that's used particularly for websites?
Website development, and also CSS.
Okay. What are the other popular things happening? Because I know also people want to design apps, students want to design apps, and so forth. I might hear something called JavaScript, and I know what it is, but I'm trying to help the listener.
Yeah.
Trying to figure this out. JavaScript, Java, what's that,
right.
and what's Python, what's happening with that?
Right. So all those are just different languages, and they all have different purposes. So most of them have just built on one another. So, for example, JavaScript is a very, not evolved, but it's a language that is piggybacked on the previous languages for website development to do really cool things, like the more efficient websites you see these days with all of the moving backgrounds, and it's kind of that next level of a website. Whereas HTML and CSS, if you remember back in like the mid 90s or so.
Right.
Websites were just very straightforward, and they were primarily just HTML and CSS.
Right. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, so here's another thing. With coding, there's a lot of push from politicians, from CEOs of these tech companies pushing coding. And teachers are now starting to integrate coding. Here's the next question. Why do you need to learn coding?
That is a great question, Fred. I personally feel that coding is a necessary life skill. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we had skills that were considered life skills back then. However, in 2016, these are life skills that are necessary for our children. When we look around and we just see how much technology has evolved, we can see, like in Japan, for example, you can order food via your app, and nobody delivers it. It just comes out of a machine. In Vegas, they have a drink machine that you order your drinks and they make it for you.
From your smartphone.
Exactly.
Make an app. So there's code behind that, right?
Exactly. And of course, for example, even here at Golden Gate Bridge with Fast Track, there's no one's taking tolls. So what we see, or what I am seeing, is there's going to be a lack of jobs, those type of kind of blue collar jobs. And so these children need to know the skills to be able to control these different things. And so I kind of think that by learning to code now, they'll be so proficient at that age, or at least interested or exposed to it,
Right.
to know that they could potentially get a career in it.
Yeah. So do we want all our kids to be coders? I mean, engineers, software engineers, do we need that? I mean, it seems that's the push there. And
Right.
What do you think about that? That whole argument against coding, like, well, my child won't be
Right.
a software engineer,
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I don't think so at all. I think a world of bad coders would be terrible, because we'd all be fixing each other's code in an endless cycle.
Right.
That would get nowhere.
It's like we're all mechanics, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Everyone's going to be, there are bad mechanics out there too,
Yeah.
right?
And then you always need another mechanic to fix the other mechanic. Seems like dental work, doctor,
Right.
same thing. So no, I don't think everyone should be coders. I think our goal is to just get as much exposure as possible, so
Right.
that the students who truly love it can excel at it. I see that in our classes, you'll have the kids absolutely enjoy it and have a great time. However, there's always a handful of students who take it to the next level and are
Right.
looking things up and going home. And that is kind of that was my goal, because when I was growing up, I wish I had a program like Code Ninjas, because I would have loved it.
Okay, so coding. So how about we hear about coding as problem solving. That's my first question about, can you give an example of its problem solving? And also, how can you code if you don't have, say, an iPad or a nice fancy machine? What can we do? What can teachers do if they're they don't have computers? How can they integrate coding? Right. That was my second question. My first question is about how can you demonstrate to us how coding is a problem-solving language?
Yeah, so I think in the last couple years, they recently, MIT developed a program called Scratch, which many people are aware of, and this is called block-based coding. And Scratch is actually its own language. So Scratch is its own language that uses block-based coding, which snaps pieces together.
Okay.
And behind those blocks is the actual code.
Okay, yeah.
So that's what's really cool. It makes it very kid-friendly and also very beginner-friendly. And
Right.
it's
Almost like a digital or virtual or digital version of Legos.
exactly. And that's what code.org has kind of done as well, because they see the value in kind of easing people in. Coding
Right.
sounds intimidating and really does look intimidating once you get into the coding. If you saw what some of our code ninjas do, you'd be really impressed, because they're literally typing lines and lines of HTML and CSS. And if you didn't know it and just looked at it, it would just look like, a random language you couldn't
Right.
read. But these 3rd through 5th graders can read it, and they're doing a great job at it. So the block-based coding is great. It is teaching kids the computational logic behind coding. So basically, if something happens, then something else will happen. And that's so much of how programming works. A
Right.
lot of if-then statements and kind of designing your program.
If you do this or you type this or something happens and then you make it do something else.
Exactly. And if like another factor is involved, then it'll do this. Or if these other factors are involved, then it'll do something else. So
Right.
in kind of in like a tree branch effect that keeps kind of going out.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So we got that down. Now, let's for the teachers who don't have a computer, any computer, any
Yeah.
technology out there. Well, first of all, I don't know how you're going to listen to this podcast, but if you don't have technology, what's another way they can, or at least technology for the kids? What's another way a teacher can integrate?
Yeah, so you can integrate coding any way you want. In fact, you can, like I said, it's basically a language. So one example that I've used, if you're doing like an art project and you want to incorporate coding, we've kind of found like this cross curriculum works really well where you combine two topics. So if you want to do a coding art program, what you could do is you would have a grid, and you could create a language. So you could have an arrow going one direction, and it could say start here, and then in your language, you could have like up, down, left, right, maybe shade half a box in, shade a quarter box in, shade another corner box in,
Right.
however your code wants. So all of these different parts of your language. And what you can do is you can design a picture, and then you just track using that language you designed what the picture is. We had two students sit with one another. They both designed pictures, and then they switched to see if the other student could create the same picture based on the code or the language.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a way to do it. And there's no computers involved. There's no screen time. Some of the pushback we see is teachers saying that, our kids are watching too much TV and they're playing too much video games.
Too much screen time, right?
Exactly. And so why should we put them in front of a computer as well? And truly my argument to that is video games and television are entertainment. So at least with coding, you're getting screen time, but they're learning something that's productive. So I would suggest cutting down that entertainment screen time, like playing games on the iPad when they're at the restaurant to keep them occupied.
Right.
And
Which I'm guilty of doing that
yeah,
too, right?
no,
I do that,
100%. It's perfect.
Right.
It's perfect.
But this is a different intention.
Exactly.
Right. It's a different intention where there's actually learning happening. Now, I know there's research happening, and I know new research that came out with, I believe, the APA, the American Physicians or maybe Psychology Association. I forget which one. I'll find that link. Put it in the show notes. But they're saying screen time doesn't matter, right? It's not the matter, but it's definitely it's the quality of it, right?
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer in balance. I absolutely love to code, but I love spending time in nature. I love to hike. Growing up in Redding, we're right next to Mount Shasta, so
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you do some screen time and coding and whatnot, but you also make sure to get outside and play. Which was actually I was going to mention another thing you can do with coding, which I felt has worked really well, and it combines physical education and coding, is to create a language again, but this is a physical language. So it'd say like, take 10 steps and then jump over this hula hoop. So basically you would create an obstacle course, and then you'd create a language that the students could follow, and then they could design a track for another student to follow. And so in that sense, a student is programming another student to get to whatever your goal is, and that has worked really well.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. Instead of just like arbitrarily like putting things out,
exactly,
which you can do. Obviously, you can do that, but you can have the computational logic involved where you can plan things out more, definitely planned out, right?
Exactly.
And then thinking of the student, their classmate, maybe of how they can go through this obstacle course. Very cool. All right. So, Ryan, give me teachers love resources. Are there any resources besides Code Ninjas with a Z.org? Is it right? .org.
Right.
So CODENIJAZ.org. So they can go there. What other resources that teachers can go and maybe learn a little bit more about this? It could be a book, maybe, or something like that. What do you think?
I think if a teacher is truly trying to do an hour of code and they're really interested in it, it doesn't take more than 1 hour on a weekend, which I know is very valuable for a teacher, to go onto code.org and kind of just go through the students' curriculum as well and kind of start where they start. And just so, especially if you're brand new to it, it's going to seem really simple in the beginning. But that's good because for adults, it should seem very simple.
It gets harder. I've been doing it the past couple of years, and it gets harder and harder. It's true. It definitely scaffolds up, right? So code.org is a good one for teachers, yes.
Codeschool.com is great for adults. It's more or more adult designed.
Mm-hmm.
But it does get tricky as well. There is a lot of thinking that is involved. Code Academy, of course, is good for teachers. I think personally, in terms of teachers who just want to get their feet a little bit wet, I think they should use the block-based ones that are designed for kids,
Okay,
because it helps them a lot. And then they can kind of go from there. Codecombat.com is a great one. And that actually is, you use JavaScript or Ruby to control a character and solve puzzles. So it kind of exposes teachers to what coding is and
right.
some of the things they're trying to do with block-based coding too.
Interesting. Okay, so how long has Code Ninjas been around?
We're a pretty young company, so we are about 5 months young, I guess.
Right, and we found you about a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And we're really lucky to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've seen that just already with us being out there. The demand is so high for computer science curriculum, both from the community and from the schools.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is something challenging for you in coding with kids? What's give me a moment that challenged you, and I'll extend that question in a bit. Okay. But think of a moment that or a situation where kids, it's hard. You have a hard time with kids with coding in particular.
I think the duration of how long they're having to sit is hard. That's why we felt that 1 hour is perfect, and they're involved completely in that hour.
What age group was this you're talking about? Like
third through fifth.
Third, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
K through second, more like 20 minutes.
Right. You're not
max, and then they're
right?
like moving around and like being super squirmy.
Right. Okay.
So yeah. I think time duration, and just I can always tell that when the class ends, they're always bummed that it ended so quickly, but they also have so much energy. So I think that balance is just really important.
Balance. That's a key. That's a key thing to understand how to integrate coding into the school curriculum, right, or any kind of learning situation. Okay, so the kids are getting engaged already. They're already engaged, but how do you maintain that engagement? How do you keep inspiring them to do that coding? Because I know sometimes when I'm just speaking of experience myself, I do coding and sometimes it's way too hard. I can't do it, and I'll leave it for months at a time. How do you keep that going with students?
I'm constantly challenging them. So our curriculum is always evolving. I'm always paying attention to what works. I think it's my inner teacher.
Right.
No teacher is ever satisfied with their curriculum. Even if they're a veteran teacher, they might be complacent with it, but they maybe deep down know they could always make it better. I think there's always something that can be evolved in terms of curriculum to make everything better. And so in that sense, we're always an evolving program. And so I respect the intelligence of the kids. I think a lot of times we as adults don't realize how truly smart these kids are. And
they are. They're really smart.
100%. And they can take whatever I throw at them. And they might have a little difficulty like at first, but they definitely understand. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that when we get older, we kind of have a box that we live in terms of how things should work. That's not necessarily how they do work. So, for example, my parents, I guess, they have like a smartphone, but they don't really have that creative freedom to do all the things that a kid can do. They think, okay, this is this box is really confusing. I don't know. They need to be told exactly what to do. When a child who has no box at all comes up to this phone or this iPad, they are completely free. They're going through settings. They're going through, things that maybe some adults would never even think about going who aren't as techie. So I think that is huge as well. And so by giving them coding as well, I'll have students coming up to me asking me how to do all of these, how do I add a new video and, create a border around it and make it this size and that, and like taking it to the next level. And so that to me is really awesome.
Yeah, they're getting excited more and more.
Exactly.
So building their skills.
Exactly.
Cool. All right, Ryan, give me a favorite quote or phrase, a mantra that you want to share with teachers out there.
A mantra or
something that you take personally and you take that with you in your professional life.
I think just passion. I think whatever you're teaching, just be passionate about. I think that's why I really enjoy my job and started Code Ninjas, was because I'm truly passionate, and I believe that I'm doing good. I think that in the long run, I'm truly giving kids the skill that's going to benefit them, whether or not they continue coding in the future or whether or not they fall in love with coding, whether or not they hate it. That's fine because it's exposure. And so, a kid can be like, I absolutely hated coding and when I was a kid. I'm never going to do it again. And then you'll have other kids who said, I loved it. And so I think, just passion.
Okay, Ryan. So I know you're a big sci-fi enthusiast.
Yeah.
Okay, movies especially, right?
Yeah.
And my next question is about something that teachers can get, or like a book or a movie, and you can pick either one and share with us a favorite book or a favorite movie from your standpoint. What's your favorite thing? Because honestly, when I saw, I know you recommended to me The Martian with Matt Damon. My mind was blown.
Yeah.
I watched it like 3 times, and my kids are 3 and 5, and they watched it with me at least one time, and they loved it also, and that young.
Yeah.
What do you think? Book or a movie? Go with movies.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many favorite movies. These don't pertain directly to coding, but I think one movie that, of course, I think most people have seen is 2001 Space Odyssey. I hope most people have seen. And unfortunately, a lot of people my age actually haven't seen that movie.
It's gotten lost.
Yeah.
Right?
And the irony is that the technology they have in a lot of these movies we have today, but not in the same form.
Name an example.
Like the treadmill, for example, like walking on, like that's a very basic example,
right?
But she's walking up at an angle,
right? The treadmill. That at least that movie came out like 1969 or something like 68, 69.
I think it was the late 80s or
no,
mid 80s.
no,
or was
2001.
I'm not sure.
No, 2001. I'm gonna look it up right now.
Okay.
2001. The movie came out in 1968.
Oh, wow.
Right.
I'm totally wrong.
And also, there's something there that when Apple went through their patent suits about, touch screens and then how they're arguing that, the tablet, the first tablet, besides Moses and his tablets, it's the tablet you'll see in the movie in 2001.
Yeah.
I think that was the first time it was visualized.
Right.
Right. And it just kicked in these future engineers and latched onto that and started building upon that.
Yeah, and so you just see so much technology that we take for granted for. We all have...
Star Trek?
Yeah, exactly. And we have these touch screens in our pocket.
Right, a whole computer.
Exactly.
That's more powerful than the original Apollo lunar lander, right?
Right.
That they landed on. That's amazing to me.
Yeah, so we're living in a pretty awesome time, and so these kids are going to see things that I can't even
What do you think of The Martian?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved the logic of it and the problem solving.
Right.
It was excellent.
Yeah, I love that when they need that little piece of code in there, like Matt Damon had to put in.
Yeah.
You guys got to watch that if you haven't seen that yet. It's available, I know, on iTunes and online right now.
Yeah.
Now, how about, what are you excited about now?
I'm excited about this kind of educational technology movement that I feel like we're part of. I feel like we're on the precipice of some good things to happen in curriculum. As Code Ninjas grows and we continually get more schools, we're seeing more support from the communities and the principals. We're having the students always going home and saying, like, we can't wait for Code Ninjas next week. Right. I had a mom come to me and say, like, the only thing he cares about all week is Code Ninjas.
Nice.
And just thanking us. And then also seeing the value of our after-school program and seeing schools trying to add that same kind of value to day school. And to me, that's my end goal, is to try and get as much computer science curriculum in day school. On a district level, that would be phenomenal. But having worked in the public school system, I know how difficult it is to get things like that to happen.
Now, being an educator and also running your own company, now give us a time-saving tip.
Time-saving tip.
Or what do you use to help you save time? You know what I mean? It can be an app. It can be some kind of workflow that you do that teachers can consider using or trying out. Just
be organized. To be honest, I mean, it seems really obvious, but in my world, that has worked the best for me. I'm just always prepared. And also just be open. Don't have too many expectations. I think that was also one thing for me as well, is like, when we have these expectations of how a curriculum should go or how our classroom should run, we feel, kind of negative because we didn't fit our expectations. So I think just be open to your expectations, try not to have them, and just kind of go with the flow and always be evolving and just take everything and as a learning experience, I guess.
Right.
And for me, that has been great.
And maybe going with that also, maybe keeping, I like to connect that with keeping things simple.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, streamline your life.
And that's what coding teaches you.
Right.
Keeping it simpler.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, because the thing with coding as well is you can do the same thing in a million different ways. It just depends on how you want to write it. Just like we can write an essay in so many different ways. If we had one topic and we gave it to 30 students and we said, write this essay, you're going to have a multitude of different ways to get your point across.
Right.
It's the same with coding.
With coding.
Ideally, you'd have the most simplest, efficient form, and that's just coding. Obviously, writing is a much different art form. But coding is also an art form.
And there's a certain elegance to it.
Exactly.
Right. Elegant code. I hear that once in a while. It's elegant code, right?
Yeah. Because good code is good code. It's awesome. Because the thing about coding is it's never a one-man project. It's very, very rarely a one-man project unless you're some kind of, prodigy. And even then, you still need people to do your grunt work.
Even Mark Zuckerberg.
He's still got his peons.
He still has his own peons.
So, yeah, I think,
Okay, cool. All right, so Ryan, we're going to finish this up.
Yep.
But before we do, share with us the best advice that you ever received, and what's your advice to teachers?
The best advice that I actually ever received was take things seriously, but not too seriously. Which basically means do your best job, but don't take it home with you. Understand that you did the best you could do, and you put all yourself out there, but don't worry too much about it. Like, don't pine over it too much, and then just move forward. I think a lot of times,
your best, right?
Yeah, a lot of times we hang on to the past and
don't worry about perfection.
It holds us back. Yeah, because perfection is always evolving. So maybe you were perfect in that moment, but you're going to be better in the next moment.
That's true.
It's relative.
Very true. Right. So that's the advice that you got, and that's the same thing you're going to share with teachers, right? Yeah, I think that's very, very powerful. And I think sometimes when things get more complicated, especially when teachers get more things piled on top of them, it gets more complicated. And as teachers, we need to filter out things and make things simpler.
Yeah, I agree. I know. I don't know if people still do New Year's resolutions, but I mean, I think a great one, people are always worried about, like, I need to get in shape or this or that. I think a great one is just kind of streamline your life, simplify it. And focus on the things that really matter, and then the rest can kind of, dissipate.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much for joining our show. And,
of course.
But before we do, please tell our audience again where they can find you.
Sure.
Okay, and anything else?
Yeah, so you can follow us on Twitter. It's at sfcodeninjas with a Z. Or you can check us out on our website, which is www.codeninjaz.org. And yeah.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much, sir, for joining us again.
Thank you so much, Fred.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Teaching Bites podcast at www.teachingbites.com.